The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, scattering glass dust and silence across the Zenith Dynamics gala. Ben Carter flinched, a fine spray of red wine staining his lapel, his face going pale. Frank Peterson, holding the stem of a broken glass, smiled. "Some things," he announced, his voice carrying, "just aren't built to last." The sharp crack of the champagne fluid echoed, pulling the air from the grand ballroom. Ben stood near the edge of the dance floor, a red wine blossom spreading on his cream linen jacket. His usual calm had fractured, replaced by a rigid stillness. I watched his jaw tighten, a telltale sign of the anger he tried to swallow. Frank Peterson, still holding the thin, broken stem, simply watched Ben. A casual, almost dismissive flick of his wrist sent the remaining glass into a busboy's waiting tray. His gaze lingered on Ben for a beat too long. Then he turned, engaging another executive with a hearty laugh. My grip on my own glass tightened. A cold current, sharper than the January air outside, ran through me. Ben's humiliation was a raw thing, visible to everyone who cared to look. But beneath the public embarrassment, a different kind of heat began to build inside me. Frank Peterson, I thought. You will regret the day you ever spoke Ben's name in such a way. It was a quiet promise made in the hum of a crowded room, a seed planted in the fertile ground of corporate ambition and personal loyalty. Life before Frank Peterson had been a meticulous ascent. My career at Zenith Dynamics was a demanding landscape, but I knew its contours. Each promotion, each late night, had been a calculated step. I thrived on the structure, the measurable progress, the clear trajectory. There was a satisfaction in mastering the intricate data, in forecasting market shifts others only reacted to. It was a world of sharp edges, demanding focus, and a certain kind of unwavering drive. Then I met Ben Carter. It was a Tuesday afternoon at Brewed Awakening, a coffee shop with mismatched furniture and the constant smell of roasted beans. I was hunched over a laptop, revising a presentation. He was sketching in a thick notebook, ink bleeding into the heavy paper. He worked as a freelance graphic designer, his world one of color palettes and client visions, a stark contrast to my spreadsheets and projections. Ben was grounded, content in his own creative space, untroubled by the corporate ladder I scaled with such intensity. We talked about art, about data, about the quiet hum of a working city. He saw things differently, described nuances I often overlooked. His calm was a counterpoint to my ambition, his quiet creativity, a balance to my structured drive. It felt like finding the missing piece to a puzzle I hadn't known existed. We married 18 months later, a small ceremony at the courthouse. Our life together settled into a comfortable rhythm. He managed his freelance work from a sunlit corner of our house, handled the groceries, and always made sure there was a fresh pot of coffee brewing when I came home. He created a soft landing, a place where the demands of Zenith Dynamics could recede, if only for a few hours. The shift began subtly with the arrival of Frank Peterson as the new chief operating officer. He swept through Zenith like a winter storm, reorganizing departments, demanding new metrics, and cutting through established practices with a surgeon's precision. He was efficient, ruthless, and utterly focused on results. Within 6 months, I found myself promoted to lead a new strategic forecasting unit, reporting directly to him. It was a significant step, the kind of opportunity I had always worked toward. "He'll work you to the bone, Sarah," Susan, a veteran manager, had warned me over coffee in the break room. "Peterson expects 24/7. He doesn't understand off the clock." Her words proved prophetic. My work-life balance, already precarious, vanished. Dinners became forgotten leftovers or Ben showing up at the office with a takeout bag and a knowing smile. He'd sit in my office, quietly reading or sketching, waiting until I could finally push away from my desk. He never complained. His support was a steady, quiet current. Frank's initial interest in my personal life began innocently enough. "You're married, aren't you, Sarah?" he'd asked one afternoon, noticing my wedding ring glinting under the harsh office lights. His tone was casual, yet something in it made the hairs on my arms prickle. "Who's the lucky man?" I told him about Ben, his design work, our arrangement. Frank listened, nodding, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Then the comments started, small, innocuous at first. So, your husband works from home, a modern arrangement, certainly. Orchestrate. Must be nice to have someone handle the domestic side, frees you up for real work. Each comment was a grain of sand, an almost imperceptible friction. I swallowed my anger, told myself it was just Frank's way, his old school view of the world. I needed this promotion, needed to prove myself in this new role. Protecting our partnership meant protecting my position. But the digs grew sharper, more frequent. They drifted from the casual office chat to more public settings, like the company happy hour or that very gala. He started referring to Ben as Mr. Freelance or the stay-at-home husband, always with a slight, knowing smirk that suggested a joke only he truly understood. Each barb was a small, public emasculation, chipping away at Ben's quiet dignity and at my own resolve. The executive retreat at Pinterest Lodge promised a weekend of strategic alignment and team building, but the invitation extending to the spouses felt like an unlit fuse. The lodge, a sprawling log structure nestled in the Upper Peninsula, smelled of pine and damp earth. I saw the invitation as an opportunity for Ben to finally meet my colleagues outside the frenetic pace of the office, to show them the man behind the woman who often worked past midnight. It was also, I realized later, an open stage. Ben arrived Friday afternoon looking crisp in a charcoal blazer, his smile easy. He moved through the reception, shaking hands, asking genuine questions about people's weekend plans and their families. He had a way of listening, really listening, that drew people in. I watched him from across the room, feeling a swell of quiet pride as I saw colleagues like Susan laughing with him, engaged in conversation. He wasn't a corporate man, but he had a natural charm, an unforced ease. Frank Peterson, however, watched all of this with a peculiar intensity. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, nursing his third scotch, his eyes narrowed. When Ben moved to join me, Frank's gaze followed, cold and appraising. A knot tightened in my stomach. Dinner that evening was in the lodge's main dining room, a cavernous space with long communal tables. I had hoped to steer Ben to a quieter corner, but Frank, with an almost predatory swiftness, slid into the empty seat beside Ben just as we sat down. The air around our section of the table grew taut. "So Ben," Frank began, his voice just loud enough to carry to those nearby, "Sarah tells me you're a graphic designer." The word designer seemed to hang in the air, deflated. "Interesting line of work. Not exactly Zenith Dynamics, is it?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Must be a comfort to have the wife bringing home the bacon, eh? Big corporate salary keeps the lights on." Ben's smile remained fixed, but I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. "We support each other, Frank," he said, his voice level. "Sarah excels at what she does, and I help keep our life running smoothly while pursuing my own creative work." Frank snorted, a dismissive sound. "Creative work, right." The conversation shifted slightly, but Frank kept circling back, his comments becoming increasingly personal, increasingly pointed. He talked about real men providing for their families, about ambition, about leaving a legacy, not a sketchbook full of doodles. He was dissecting our lives, our choices, our very partnership for the entertainment of a table full of colleagues. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I wanted to intervene, to shut him down, but my voice seemed lodged in my throat. What could I say? What if I escalated things, jeopardized my standing with him? The fear of losing the promotion, of disrupting the careful balance of my career, held me captive. I watched Ben endure it, his posture stiffening with each jab. "Some men," Frank said, leaning back in his chair, a cruel glint in his eye, "are just happy to be a trophy husband, I suppose. Content to let their wives go out and conquer the world." Ben's knuckles were white around his water glass. He didn't speak, didn't react beyond that subtle tightening, but the silence he projected was louder than any outburst. It was a silence filled with pain, with quiet fury. I felt a sharp, almost physical ache in my chest, watching the man I loved, my partner, suffer this public degradation. The drive back to our hotel room, a small cabin separate from the main lodge, was silent. The only sound was the crunch of tires on gravel. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind replaying Frank's words, each one a fresh cut. Ben, I finally whispered, my voice thick with shame. I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say. He's an absolute monster. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the passing of headlights, etched with a pain I hadn't fully comprehended until that moment. Sarah, he said, his voice low, that man has been publicly emasculating me for months, and you've been enduring this alone? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusing. I thought I could handle it, I confessed, the words tasting like ash. I didn't want to rock the boat. This promotion, it's so important. I thought if I just ignored him, he'd stop. Ben ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep weariness. No job is worth your dignity, he said, his voice unnaturally calm. Or mine. Inside our sparsely furnished hotel room, the tension remained. He sat on the edge of the bed, his gaze fixed on nothing. I won't be your weakness, Sarah, he said, breaking the silence. I won't be the reason your career suffers. My heart squeezed. You're not my weakness, Ben, I insisted, moving to sit beside him. You're my strength. And Frank Peterson? He's a bully. He needs to be stopped. A month drifted by after the Pinehurst Lodge retreat, each day a slow tightening of the noose. Frank's harassment of Ben didn't subside. It simply mutated, now directly targeting my professional standing. His comments, once just snide remarks, began to actively undermine my credibility. The climax arrived during a critical meeting with Mr. Wallace, a potential client whose business would secure a multi-million-dollar contract for Zenith Dynamics. I had spent weeks preparing, meticulously crafting the presentation. The meeting was going well, Mr. Wallace nodding, impressed by the projections. Then Frank, who had joined us late, interjected. Sarah's a brilliant mind, he began, a condescending smile on his face. But sometimes her focus, well, it can wander. What with her husband's rather bohemian lifestyle, I imagine there are constant distractions at home. The air in the room chilled. Mr. Wallace's expression shifted, his gaze flicking from me to Frank, then back again, now laced with an unmistakable concern. The deal, which had seemed so close, suddenly felt distant, unattainable. He eventually made his polite excuses, citing domestic distractions and the need for a team with unwavering focus. He left without signing anything. The deal and all my efforts evaporated. Fury, cold and sharp, propelled me to Frank's office. I walked in without knocking, my voice tight. You sabotaged that meeting, I accused, standing rigidly before his desk. Mr. Wallace left because of your snide remarks about Ben. That was a multi-million-dollar contract, Frank. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile spreading. Sabotage? Sarah, please. I was merely providing a complete picture for Mr. Wallace. Transparency, you know. He needs to know his account manager isn't preoccupied. Some clients prefer the more traditional setup, a man with his eye on the prize, not distracted by what's happening in his kitchen. He paused, his smile widening. Besides, you're getting emotional. Is this about the company or your ego, Sarah? He twisted my words, my professional concern, into a personal attack, a display of female hysteria. The rage that had propelled me there deflated into a suffocating despair. I turned and walked out, the fluorescent lights of the hallway blurring. I stumbled into the executive restroom, the cool marble walls doing little to quell the heat in my face. I locked myself in a stall and cried. Silent, bitter tears, tears of frustration, of injustice, of a growing helplessness. My vision blurred through the tears, but then a sharp clarity began to form. Frank didn't just want to control my work, he wanted to destroy my personal life too. He wanted to strip away my support system, to leave me isolated and vulnerable, dependent only on him, on Zenith, on the very system that allowed him to thrive. In that moment, a dark thought, chillingly precise, took root. If he used power to control and diminish, then power would be my weapon in return. A cold resolve settled over me, pushing back the despair. The next morning, an email appeared from Frank, a terse, almost perfunctory apology for any misunderstanding yesterday. It was followed by an invitation. Strategy dinner tonight, Sarah. I think we need to clear the air, discuss your future in zeniths. My treat, 7 o'clock, the Capitol Grill. I stared at the screen, a plan, embryonic but solid, forming in my mind. The line between right and wrong felt blurred, smudged by the injustice of it all. I typed back a concise, "Yes, Frank, 7, looking forward to it." The Capitol Grill was dimly lit, all dark wood and hushed conversations. Frank was waiting at a corner booth, a charming, almost solicitous smile on his face. He ordered an expensive bottle of wine, complimented my dress, and then, slowly, expertly, began to probe. He asked about my ambitions, my real goals, beyond the numbers and reports. He spoke of partnership, of a unique alliance, of seeing eye to eye on matters far beyond the office. He talked about powerful people making powerful decisions, his gaze lingering, hinting at a connection that was anything but professional. I played my part. I feigned interest, allowing a carefully constructed vulnerability to show. I listened intently, nodded at his pronouncements, and subtly guided the conversation, feeding his ego, encouraging his narrative of shared ambition and unspoken understanding. I spoke of the pressures of my role, the loneliness at the top, allowing him to believe he was gaining insight, a unique access. He misread it entirely. He thought I was genuinely drawn to him, to his power, to the illicit thrill he imagined he was offering. He began to boast, comparing his own drive and success to what he perceived as Ben's lack of ambition. He spoke of building empires, of leaving a mark, contrasting it with a quiet life of domesticity. He was oblivious, completely blind to the cold calculation in my eyes, to the carefully constructed trap I was laying. As he ordered another round of drinks, I looked at the flickering candlelight on the table. The line I was about to cross, the path I was embarking on, felt vast and irreversible. I was about to weaponize myself, to use my own person, my own perceived vulnerability, to destroy him. The cost, I knew, would be profound. I left dinner with Frank, walking out into the cool city air. The next steps, I understood with chilling certainty, would solidify my path to revenge. There would be no turning back. The affair with Frank was a cold, calculated act. There was no passion, no flicker of attraction. It was a transaction, a means to an end. Each touch, each shared dinner, each late-night text was a step in a carefully choreographed dance. I became the woman I knew Frank wanted, ambitious, driven, untethered by conventional sentiment. I laughed at his jokes, praised his strategic genius, and allowed him to believe he was unraveling some hidden vulnerability within me. The deception was exhausting, a constant performance, but the stakes were too high to falter. His infatuation made him reckless. My perceived admiration, a potent drug. I used it to my advantage, subtly guiding conversations, asking questions that seemed innocent but were designed to extract information. He started sharing confidential details, whispers of upcoming mergers, potential acquisitions, internal power plays. He'd lean in conspiratorially, his breath smelling of whiskey and ambition, telling me things he shouldn't. "This is just between us, Sarah," he'd often say, his eyes gleaming, believing we were partners in some grand, illicit scheme. I documented everything: dates, me's, snippets of conversation, specific pieces of information. My phone became a covert recording device for key interactions, my laptop a vault for encrypted files. I created a meticulous timeline, building a case brick by brick, preparing for the day I would finally unleash it. Each piece of evidence was a fresh indication of purpose, steeling my resolve against the constant tide of self-disgust. At home, life with Ben became a careful charade. Every touch, every shared meal felt tainted by the secret I carried. My guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. I found myself becoming more guarded, my answers clipped, my thoughts always elsewhere. Ben, with his quiet sensitivity, noticed. "You're different, Sarah," he observed one evening, watching me from across the kitchen island. "You're always working, even when you're home, and there's a tension about you." I brushed off his concerns, blaming the relentless demands of the new unit, the pressure from Frank. "It's just the job, Ben," I'd say, forcing a smile. Peterson is intense. He expects perfection. He would nod, accepting my words, but his eyes held a lingering question. The distance between us grew, a subtle chasm carved by my deception. The internal conflict intensified with each passing day. The more power I gained, the deeper my self-loathing became. I was using a man's worst instincts against him. But in doing so, I felt like I was betraying everything I stood for, everything Ben and I had built. Yet, the thought of giving up, of letting Frank win, was unbearable. Ironically, Frank's treatment of Ben began to improve, or at least change. His taunts were replaced by a superficial, almost wary respect. "Your husband," he'd say to me with a slight nod, "he certainly got you focused, Sarah. Keeps you grounded, I suppose." He seemed to view Ben now as a harmless, perhaps even necessary part of my power package, oblivious to the true nature of our relationship. It was a twisted satisfaction, knowing I was using his own arrogance, his own simplistic view of women and relationships, against him. Each time he spoke, I felt a surge of cold fury and calculated triumph. I continued to gather evidence, building an airtight case against him. The meticulous detail was my anchor, preventing me from succumbing to the emotional cost. I was creating an unassailable record, a weapon that would dismantle him completely. Then came a close call. One evening, Ben asked to borrow my phone to look up a recipe. As he scrolled, a notification for a new message flashed across the screen from Frank. It was just a time, a place, innocuous enough on its own, but the timing, the frequency, and the casual intimacy of the message could have easily sparked suspicion. My heart leaped into my throat. I snatched the phone back, muttering something about needing to check an urgent email. Ben looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, before shrugging it off. The incident was a harsh dose of reality. The immense risk I was taking wasn't just to my career, to my professional reputation. It was to my marriage, to the very foundation of my life with Ben. The weight of my secret grew heavier, a suffocating presence that isolated me more and more from the one person I should have been able to trust. 3 months. 3 months into the calculated affair, and the carefully constructed facade I'd built around myself began to crack. The performance was draining, the constant lies a heavy weight. My nights were restless, my days filled with a dull ache of guilt. The woman Ben knew, the one I truly was, felt like a stranger. Ben's patience, usually boundless, finally wore thin. One Saturday morning, he found me staring blankly at my laptop, an old email from Frank open on the screen. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, "we need to talk. You're not here. You've barely been here for weeks, even when you were in the same room. What's going on?" The pressure, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety of discovery snapped something inside me. "What do you want me to do, Ben?" I lashed out, my voice sharp, unfamiliar. "That I'm stressed, that my job is demanding. You have no idea what it's like. The constant pressure, the demands on my time, the expectations." The words tumbled out, ugly and unfair, deflecting from the truth. He recoiled, his face tightening, the hurt clear in his eyes. He said nothing more, simply turned and walked away, retreating to his studio. He closed the door softly, but the sound resonated like a slammed door in my chest. He sensed a betrayal he couldn't name, a shift in the very foundation of our life together. In that agonizing silence, the clarity I needed arrived. This affair, this calculated act of revenge, was costing me what I truly valued. My relationship with Ben. My marriage, once my anchor, was now adrift, listing dangerously. The hollow triumph of manipulating Frank was nothing compared to the desolation of losing Ben. It was time. It was time to execute the plan, no matter the cost to my career, to my reputation, to myself. I needed an ally, someone within Zenith's upper echelons who valued discretion in the company's stability above all else. Mr. Davis, a senior director known for his quiet authority and aversion to public scandal, was my target. I sent him an encrypted email, concise and to the point, hinting at significant improprieties involving Frank Peterson, information that could severely impact Zenith's standing. He agreed to meet, his initial skepticism evident in his stiff posture. We met in a quiet, off-site coffee shop, far from the prying eyes of the office. He sat across from me, a carefully neutral expression on his face, listening. I spoke calmly, factually, outlining the pattern of Frank's behavior, the increasing recklessness, the subtle boasts. I could see the shift in his gaze, a flicker of intrigue replacing his dismissal. My calculated approach, devoid of emotional accusations, was working. Then I presented the dossier, a slim, unassuming folder, but inside lay the meticulous evidence. Copied emails detailing unsanctioned expenditures, snippets of recorded conversations where Frank divulged insider information about the upcoming Orion acquisition, meticulously cross-referenced with stock trades from his personal account. There were receipts for client entertainment that pointed to personal expenses and schedules that contradicted official meeting times. The evidence was irrefutable. Frank's misuse of company funds, his blatant insider trading, his abuse of power. It was all there, laid out in cold, hard facts. Mr. Davis flipped through the pages, his face paling with each document. He was stunned, not just by the depth of Frank's deception, but by my cunning, my methodical approach. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, a grudging respect mixed with something akin to fear. "This is comprehensive, Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "More than comprehensive. This is damning." He closed the folder, his jaw tight. "Frank Peterson will be dealt with," he assured me, his voice regaining its firm edge. "Discreetly. Zenith Dynamics cannot afford this kind of scandal. There would be no public investigation, no drawn-out courtroom drama. Frank would disappear quietly, in early retirement or a private health matter. That was the Zenith way." A moment of triumph, sharp and fleeting, pierced through the exhaustion. I had won. Frank Peterson was defeated. But the victory felt hollow, a bitter taste on my tongue. The cost had been too high. I drove home, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place I had desecrated. I braced myself for the inevitable. The fallout with Ben would be immense, irreparable, perhaps. He was in his studio, the scent of turpentine hanging in the air. I walked in, my hands trembling. "Ben," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I've done something terrible." It was the beginning of my confession, the first step on a long, painful road. Life's costly choices can unfold in ways we never anticipate. Stick around to the end to see how these choices ultimately play out. The words, once a tangled mess in my mind, came out in a rush, cold and precise, laying bare the truth. I confessed it all, the affair, the calculated manipulation, the meticulous gathering of evidence, the quiet delivery of Frank Peterson's professional death sentence. Ben sat on the edge of the sofa in his studio, listening, his face a canvas of changing emotions, stunned disbelief, then profound pain, slowly hardening into anger. The scent of linseed oil and turpentine, usually a comfort, now felt heavy, suffocating. "He humiliated you, Ben," I explained, my voice cracking, desperate for him to understand. "He tried to dismantle us, to strip away your dignity, to make me choose between my career and you. I just wanted to protect us, to protect what we had." His gaze, when it finally met mine, was a storm. "Protect us," he repeated, his voice low, shaking. "You protected us by sleeping with him, by lying to me for months, by becoming a monster to fight a monster, Sarah?" His anger, when it erupted, was not just about the affair, it was about the deception, the violation of trust, the calculated coldness of my actions. "How could you? How could you become so ruthless? You're just like him." The accusation, "You're just like him," cut deeper than any other. It was the mirror image of my worst fear. Then his own pain poured out. "Do you know what his words did to me? Trophy husband. Playing house, ba'imas." I tried to pretend it didn't matter, but it ate at me. I started to question everything, Sarah. My work, my place in your life, my worth. I thought I was strong enough to shake it off, but I wasn't. And all this time, while I was trying to hold on to my dignity, you were out there, doing that. His voice broke, laced with a raw vulnerability I rarely saw. "I can't be with someone who could do that," he said, the words falling into the silence like stones. Even for me, even to protect me, as you say, it changes everything. It changes who you are. Tears streamed down my face. Please, Ben, I pleaded, reaching out for him, but he flinched away. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I paid a heavy price too. It was a dark place, but I thought it was the only way. He stood up, walked to his closet, and pulled out a small duffel bag. He began to pack, folding clothes with a deliberate, almost mechanical precision. I need time, Sarah, he said, not looking at me. I need space. I can't think straight right now. I can't look at you without seeing all of it. The sound of his zipper closing was a final, terrible punctuation mark. He walked past me, his silhouette framed in the doorway for a moment, then he was gone. The front door clicked shut, a sound that echoed the closing of a chapter. The next week, the corporate grapevine hummed. Frank Peterson was out. Ethical violations was the official, carefully vague reason. A quiet, clean execution, just as Mr. Davis had promised. A week later, my promotion was announced. Director of Strategic Initiatives. My name was on the office door now, a larger corner office with a panoramic view of the city. The victory, however, was as cold and empty as the chair across from my new gleaming desk. Colleagues offered congratulations, but their eyes held questions. They whispered about Frank's sudden departure, about my rapid ascent, piecing together fragments of a story they couldn't quite grasp. I saw the speculation, the judgment, in their glances. My new office, the one I had worked so hard for, felt like a cage. The house was cold and empty, Ben's absence a gaping void. I tried to call him, to text, to explain again, to beg for another chance. But my calls went to voicemail, my texts unread. The silence from him was a heavier punishment than any words. It reinforced the despair, solidified the terrible truth. My revenge, once a blazing fire of purpose, had incinerated not just Frank Peterson, but also my own life. Weeks bled into months, each day a desolate echo of the last. The new corner office, the impressive title, the subtle deference from colleagues, it all meant nothing. My professional success, once the driving force of my life, felt hollow, a heavy costume I wore for a role I no longer understood. What was the point of achieving everything if there was no one to share it with? No quiet moment with Ben to celebrate or simply exist. The silence in the house was suffocating. I tried to fill it with work, with frantic cleaning, with anything that would numb the constant ache of his absence. But the silence persisted, a tangible presence reminding me of what I had lost. One evening, I sat down at my old desk, the one Ben had built for me years ago, and began to write. Not an email, not a text, but a letter, written on heavy cream paper in my own hand. I poured out my heart, every confession, every regret, every raw emotion. I acknowledged my profound error, the terrible damage I had inflicted on our love, on his trust. I didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly. I just laid bare the truth of my remorse, the depth of my despair, and my unwavering commitment to rebuilding whatever fragments remained, if given the smallest chance. I folded the letter, sealed it, and drove it to the post office myself, placing it in the slot with a prayer I didn't know I still held. My work at Zenith continued, but with a new somber perspective. The ruthless ambition that had driven me felt distant, replaced by a quiet commitment to integrity. I focused on the numbers, on the strategic planning, but the thrill was gone. The moral compromises I had made now tasted like ash. I realized then that true power wasn't about dominating others, but about owning your choices, good or bad. Then, one quiet afternoon, as I was watering the wilting hydrangeas on our front porch, I saw a familiar car pull into the driveway. Ben. He stepped out, his shoulders a little heavier, his face tired, but his eyes were clear, calm. My breath caught in my throat. He walked up the path, stopped a few feet from me. "I got your letter," he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Read it a few times. Been doing a lot of thinking." My heart hammered against my ribs. I could only nod, unable to speak. "I still love you, Sarah," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "That hasn't changed. But what you did, it's a deep wound. It's not something I can just forget. It's not something I can just forgive, not yet anyway. He paused, his gaze dropping to the worn wooden planks of the porch. But I'm willing to try therapy, to see if there's anything left to mend. A wave of emotion, a turbulent mix of relief and renewed sorrow washed over me. I wept, silent tears, knowing this was not a swift, happy ending. This was just the beginning of a long, arduous journey. It was a commitment to the hard, messy work of healing. We began counseling the following week. It was slow, painful work, meticulously uncovering the layers of our damaged relationship, pulling apart the threads of deceit and betrayal. We talked about Frank, about my motives, about Ben's pain, about the silent resentments that had festered. There were arguments, tears, moments of crushing despair, and small, tentative steps of understanding. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that paying the true price for my actions meant a lifetime of earning back his trust, day by painful day. There was no perfect resolution, no magical eraser for what had happened. Our story wasn't ending with a neat bow, but with a commitment to the messy, difficult, essential work of rebuilding. It became a quiet testament in our quiet Midwestern town to the enduring cost of betrayal and the slow, arduous path to redemption. The quiet hum of the Midwestern evening settled over our townhouse. Months later, the echoes of Dominic's cruel words still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by the slow, deliberate rhythm of healing. Ben and I sat on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly under our combined weight. The counseling sessions had been grueling, stripping away layers of hurt and resentment, revealing the raw, fragile core of our love. My promotion to Director of Strategic Initiatives had come, a hollow victory draped in the heavy cost of my choices. I'd learned the hard way that power gained through moral compromise brought only a bitter taste. Frank Peterson was gone, vanished from Zenith Dynamics, but the scars of his influence and my reaction to it remained. Ben reached for my hand, his grip gentle but firm. "It's going to be a long road, Sarah," he said, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. "But I'm here." I squeezed his hand, a silent promise. There were no grand pronouncements of forgiveness, no dramatic declarations of a fresh start, just the quiet commitment to the hard work ahead, a testament to resilience, and the slow, arduous path to redemption in our unassuming Midwestern town.